All right, like I've been doing, I'm going to go ahead and stream this so that you can pause and rewind if you're following along. I just paste the stream in the Discord, so if you want to follow along that way, you can. If you just want to watch my screen, you can on my screen share on Discord. I have kind of the agenda on topics that I'm going to cover in this stream, in this code along. All of this is the same Tailrunner application that's been on my GitHub. So just to show off the repo and its current state and where it is, I'll give you the URL to the Tailrunner, and this is just a little demo. So this is right here at this URL, github.com. Evan Goodman said Tailrunner. It's just a little demo for my class. That in general, the whole purpose of this is to give them some guidance towards the things they need to build. And so you can clone that and follow along. Last week on Friday, I built out some things, but my audio settings were off. And so I kind of had to scrap the recording. And so I'm going to start today off by reviewing some of the different things that I did on Friday, some of the different code chunks that I wrote that will be helpful for my class to see twice, or if you're seeing it for the first time. And so to kind of start from the top is I have a front end built in React, and this is the Vite package installer. So it's a flavor of React using this Vite tool to install it. And we've got a login system working with Axios, and this Axios is a dependency that makes calls to an API backend that we have built in Express. And so if I kind of close all my tabs and show the Express package JSON, I've got a start dev script that kind of runs my Express server. And so to get the backend running, npm run start dev, to get the backend up and running, this has a Mongo database, that's alive on Atlas Mongo. So you can see all the data kind of being stored there. And I can use my MongoDB Compass to boot that up and see that data that's kind of going in under Tailrunner. And I've got these different collections, and one of my collections is my user collection. And I don't have a whole lot of different users, but they are we got 8 documents, and so my evan@rankin.edu is my email that I'm logging in with, and you can see my hashed password. And this particular user has a customer role and an admin role. And I've got some different users that my students trolled me on and put some silly Doge 2014, not even 2024. Nonetheless, that's my database. And so we got the backend running. Now, one thing I showed along the way, and I don't remember where I showed it, is a front end build auto script. I'm a big fan of running a build auto script. And last week I got a question that came in, and it was around this .env file. So to jump ahead, notice the build script. If you just do an npm run build, the command is vite build. And that's going to lead to the .env production script. So to jump ahead, we've got this env file. And when you run a build script, the build is like, hey, you're ready for production. That's kind of the purpose of the build script, is you're getting ready to build this for production. You're getting rid of all the troubleshooting, breakpoints, all the debugging things that you don't need debugging code. You don't need debugging code in production. So a build script is basically getting you ready for production. So when I look at this build auto, it is running a Vite build script. So last week we kind of encountered this problem with a .env. Notice first off, I've got a .env for my back end. I also have a .env for my front end. So if you didn't follow along last week and you're one of my students, I want you to do a cd to your front end, okay? And I want you to install .env as another dependency on the front end. So there are different dependencies. Your front end has different dependencies than your back end, okay? And we're gonna run .env on the front end, so you have to install that on the front end as well. The problem that we encountered last week is I kind of went down this rabbit hole of showing my students you can have different env files. You can have an env for development and a separate env for production. And so I made another file, .env.production. And the idea behind this file, this env file, is that when you actually deploy it, it would read the variables from the production file versus reading it. We had this one, .env.local. Local, let me spell that right. Okay, and what was happening, even though we were in development, it was pulling the variable from production. The reason that was happening is, again, going back to the scripts, we were doing a build script on the front end, which again, that build script is basically a production script. Okay, so I just wanted to highlight why that was happening last week. I know, Tim, you were asking that question, and the answer did come back to it was the scripts. But for right now, I'm just going to kind of hang tight on having these different scripts. And I'm just going to have a regular .old env. And the only variable I have in here is my local host 2024. Okay, and I need to show off how I got that refactored. So notice I got my backend running, and I'm also going to run my front end script with that npm run build auto. Okay, and what's really nice is as I change my front end source code, it automatically reruns this build script and rebuilds my HTML file, my index HTML. It rebuilds my CSS file. It rebuilds my JavaScript file. And that'll just happen as I save my source code, that watch, that's -- watch right here. As I change a source code file, it'll pick up that the files have changed and it'll rerun my Vite build. So that's a real cool script. Nonetheless, now if I kind of go back here, you could see my backend running on 2024. And if I boot it up, it is a Monday morning, so of course right off the top, let me go to my app.jsx. Thought I left this in a working state, but really quick, let's see if I can fix this. It's come on, Monday morning. So I'm getting cannot read a map of something. Oh, here, I don't need my pet owner list. I don't have that. I'm not sure when I brought that in. So I'm going to comment out my pet owner list. I'm just going to make my route back to the login form. I don't have the pet owner list working yet. So right now, And I'm going to kind of talk about these routes and routes that that's on the agenda. So if I refresh that, okay. So now I got my login form, and this is the current state. Now to talk about React Router DOM. So number one, login front end with Axios. So I should be able to. Evan at rankin.edu, 12345. And if I hit submit, it says user logged in successfully. And if at this point, that's all I've got going on. Either I'm getting successful logins, or if I put a bad password. I do have some bootstrap validation going on. So if I don't at least type five characters, or if I don't type an email address, I've got a little validation going on. And that's basically the current state. So my current username, current password. All right, so right now, the code that we're looking at, this routes plural and routes singular, this is coming from React Router DOM. And so you guys might remember last week we installed a new dependency called React Router DOM. This was different than React Router. So if I search for React Router, you're going to see one for React Router and one React Router DOM. Remember that React has what's called native React. And native React is a platform for building mobile apps. And so the difference between these two packages is that React Router is kind of a parent package that can be used for React Native as well, to build apps for your iPhone and Android devices. But we're not building mobile apps right now. We're building web apps. So the correct dependency is React Router DOM. And what's beautiful about React Router DOM is that, now we can have a navbar, we can have nav links, and it'll look like, multiple pages. It'll look like, you're going from page to page to page. And as you guys learn in HTML, you've got these HTML links, and you just go from one HTML file to another HTML file to another HTML file. But with React, remember React is a single page application. So basically the JavaScript changes all the content on the page to make it look like you're going from page to page to page, but in reality it's all the same page. It's just changing out the content. Okay, and so that's what React Router DOM does so well, is it changes content on the page like super snappy, super fast, faster than a traditional like client who makes a request to a server to get an HTML file and send that file back down. So that's a major advantage of React. Let's go ahead and install React Router DOM on the front end. Okay, so in your terminal, close this down and install React Router DOM. Then there's just a couple of steps to get this working, to get React Router DOM working. The first step is to wrap the main element. This app is a component, right? This is a functional component. This is a component that's the root component of our web application. And so once you install this dependency, you need to import the browser router. Again, that says we're going to be doing our routing in a web browser. It's all it says, because there are different types of routers. We're just specifying every type of browsing will be done in a browser, right? And you can kind of click on that if you really want to. So that's kind of first step, to wrap the root element in this browser router tag that is imported from React Router DOM. And then if I look at my components and I go, well, if I just look at my app JSX, then we can bring in the route singular and routes plural from React Router DOM. And we basically specify the dynamic part of the page. You're going to notice here in my app, I just have a container. Inside the container, I've got a header with a component navbar. This is all static in the sense that it's not going to depend on our front-end routing. Then I've got a main tag, and then everything here in the routes, this is what React Router is just going to swap out the content. And so right now I have kind of two paths. I've got a root path and a login path. So if I navigate to /login, it'll take me to the same login form. Okay. And then I've got a footer tag, and I've got a little static content down here. But here's the routes. Inside the routes tag, you have many individual route elements. Okay. And so that kind of gets us ready for the login form. And this login form is really what we did in the first video. Essentially here, I've got a try-catch block to use Axios to post to my back end. An important piece here is this third argument with credentials that'll be used, if you leave that out, problems down the road, right? We are saying this is a username and password essentially are being passed along in this post. And then here all I do is I say if the response is a 200, which means our backend sends a success, then I set the message and I navigate to the root. Now check this out. So navigate to root. What is navigate? So here's one more React Router DOM on line 7. I import use navigate, which is a function. I call that function on line 15 to make this variable called navigate. And then using this navigate, you could see I could use that as a function to navigate me to the root. So that's how using JavaScript, we can navigate to different front-end paths. Okay, so as I'm reviewing my login front-end with Axios, believe I've done that. I've reviewed React Router DOM, and that's pretty much checked at this point. I actually jumped ahead a little bit, review the .env in Vite React. To kind of jump back to that real quick, I want to highlight a convention that you have to follow. All of your Vite variables have to start with the convention of capital Vite. My var. Okay, so I wish they kind of didn't, but they force this. If you try and have a .env variable in Vite React that doesn't start with the convention of Vite, you'll find out that you're not able to read from your variables. So just realize that that is kind of one of the rules that comes with environment variables inside of a React app built with Vite. And then kind of here, here's my routes. The next thing was this catch all route from Express. So I want to talk about, I actually hit this problem. I had seen this problem before. I hadn't seen it in a while, and then it was stumping me a little bit last week because I hadn't seen it in a while. So this actually happens the way we have this structured. We have this code structured in a front end folder, and then our Express app on the back end. Oh, I'm going to go implement cores. Talk about that real quick. Right now, our Express app has a one-liner of middleware that says, hey, serve up the front-end dist folder so that when you go to the root, of localhost 2024, it's looking for the HTML file inside of FrontEnd dist. And if I go inside of FrontEnd and I go inside of dist, it's looking for this index HTML. And so this one line is how we kind of get our front end loaded the first time. But what started happening last week is we wanted some different front end paths. And so if I go back into my app.jsx, now I want to say, hey, if I go to /login, I want this front end route, again, different between front end routes and back end routes. I want this front end route, back end route's your API. I want this front end route to load this login form, JSX. And the problem that I was having is that when I would type /login, right here, it was actually looking through all of my backend routes for some sort of path. But I don't have a /login on the back end. I only have a /login on the front end. You can see now that's working, but it wasn't working last week. And the question is why? The answer is because, well, the first place it looks is all my Express backend routes. And when Express couldn't serve up a backend route, my application was saying, I don't know what that is. And so the answer was to go back into Express, and basically this method here, if I zoom in, this is what you could call a catch-all route to say, hey, if you can't find a backend path, go ahead and look inside of the front end dist. Go ahead and basically send it to React, send it to the front end. So if the route doesn't match a backend route, basically send it to the front end, React, to then catch it. So like notice if I comment out, now, this dir name is a variable that you had to make, and the same thing with file name. Okay, why is this? What are these? Realize that the path on my local host, on my file system, is a different path than it will be when I deploy. So these are basically variables that make relative paths to my files on my file system, and it works on my local host and it'll work on a web server. Okay, these are relative paths for the files and the directories on the computer that you're on. Okay, and so in order to do lines 38 and 39, I had to have a couple of imports, line 16 and line 17. So I had to import this path variable from path, and I had to import file URL to path from URL. Both of these are not additional dependencies. These are both built into Express. Okay, so you didn't have to install anything additional for this to work. But, long story short, I had to do line 16 and 17. Then I had to code line 38 and 39, and then line 41. And again, all that does is it says, hey, if a backend route can't match it, go ahead and send it to the front end and see if you can find a route on the front end that matches what the browser is requesting. Okay, again, that supports it so that when I go now to a front end route, this is my home route, but specifically go /login, that shows up. Now if I take this out, just to kind of very temporarily comment that out, if I go back here to /login, this is what we were getting last week. Cannot get /login because it was only looking in my backend routes, and it didn't look at the front end for my path. So save that back up and refresh, and now we get that back. Okay, so that's kind of a review of what we did on Friday, of the code that we wrote on Friday. And now I'm ready to start writing some of the new stuff. and I'm going to kind of start with the easy one, which is cores. Cores is this is almost, and I know you guys are kind of all over the place, kind of zone in for me here, if everyone can kind of watch my screen just briefly, because this is a quick one. Cores, cross-origin scripting. Let's look up cores on NPM. Very common dependency that is middleware, as you kind of saw there. And I told you I was expecting a call. Give me just a minute. Let me step away and take this. Hello, Zevin. I answered, and then they hung up. My card's getting worked on. Oh, there it is. Try again. Hello, Zevin. Hey, morning. Cool. Perfect. Please, yes, please. Thank you so much. Easy. Bye. Okay, got a good mechanic working on my car, so that's good. Okay, I almost consider this boilerplate, especially when you're working on like small school projects. Maybe it gets a little bit more complicated when you're working on real world software and you have to actually worry about security. But cores is basically allowing scripts or JavaScript from cross-origin, meaning other domains. Right now, we actually have a little bit of this going on. We've got localhost 2024, and if you look at the front end, a lot of times the front end might even be running on a different port, depending on the script that you run. Like right now, if I were to run npm run dev, okay, I got 5153. So I've got different ports, and those are not considered the same origin. Right? These different ports call it different pieces of software on the same machine. Yes?
So when you say a different origin,
Yeah.
you mean a different starting point?
Yeah.
A different computer?
They can be on different computers. Now, on our case, they're on the same computer, but in many cases, they're on different computers. Okay? So right now, our front end and our back end, Jamisha, our front end and our back end are on our same computer. But in a lot of cases, they're not. Right? And so to allow your back end to receive requests from your front ends, which might be on different computers, that's when we enable cores. And all that says is, hey, allow requests to come in from different origins, or what you would call, different computers. And so the fix for this is pretty easy, okay? And we're not necessarily seeing an error right now, but we're going to bring in cores so that we don't see an error in the future, a cores error. So on our back end, we're just going to install cores, and you can actually see the source code for it real easy. It's this piece right here. We bring in cores, and we say app.use cores. And that's all it is. So we're going to npm icores on the back end. And then we're going to import cores up at the top. And then just like they have on the docs, we're just going to say app.useCores. Now, as you scroll down, you can see there's a lot of options that you can pass. Maybe you only want to allow your front end to be example.com. And so you can configure cores globally, like as we're doing here, or you can configure options and you could put it on individual routes. Okay. And so I guess the point that I want to make right now is we're going to bring in cores very simply right now, but that doesn't mean that we're going to be done configuring cores. Like this is just a real quick and dirty way of bringing in cores, and this is just going to allow all sorts of different requests coming from different front ends. Should that be the case, we're just going to allow it. This is on all routes. This is a middleware, so we're enabling cores on all of our backend routes. Okay, and then later on we might actually start working with some settings and make this more secure. But suffice to say, that's all we really need to do to implement cores to kind of get it up and running. And we will probably see that again in the future. Okay. So what next? We've got React Toastify. Let's kind of close down a couple things here. And React Toastify. You ever seen these before? These little success messages, they pop up. It's just a little front end widget, if you will, to give some success messages or error messages to our users. So just kind of looking at this, we've got so it's called Toastify. So you have to import a container and a method. The method is called toast. And then it goes in the container. And so just kind of looking at this, it looks like as soon as this app boots up, I think this would basically run it right away. But basically there's two things that you bring in. You bring in a container, and then you bring in a method, and this method can be configured with different settings. And then you get little pop-up success messages. And so maybe when our user logs in, instead of seeing a message right here, or maybe you give them a little Toastify message that says welcome to your user, that kind of thing. So it's just a nice little feature that you can use pretty easily. So npm install React Toastify. And this is a front end dependency, so we'll bring this in on the front end. Let me go to my front end and paste in React Toastify. Let me save and close my back end. Now, on my front end, let me see how I bring it in on the lab. This is actually a part of your lab. I think I actually have some instructions for bringing it in. so already did the React router. Okay. Now I bring in the imports of those two import statements that are right from the docs. Right here, we're going to bring in at the highest root level, which is app. So bring in toast container and toast. Remember, the container is how you bring the actual component in. This is the component. And you add it to the layout. So in this case, it's right underneath kind of like the main on my layout. Here's my main container. So I will bring in my toast container right here. And where this actually shows up on the page is all configured in the settings a little bit. So we can dive down into kind of how to move things around and the colors and all that fun stuff. Now, the method is called toast. And so you call toast and you can pass it a dynamic message. And so here's a couple of custom methods, right? And you can send it a string, and that will be what the toast says. So let's just get this to show up. Okay, so I'm going to make this, and you don't have to do this. It works well. So here's a function called show success. It takes one parameter, it's a string, and then you pass that into the toast as the first argument, and then you got an object here full of settings. So let's kind of go back here. Here's my app. I'm going to have this show success message. And what you can do is you can pass this down. So here on my login form, I'm going to use props to show success. So I'm basically going to pass it down. You're going to see this a lot in React, is you're going to use props to pass methods down or pass data down to children components, right? So login form is a child of app. So now I can go to login form and I can receive it. Don't forget your curlies here. Show success. And here I call it show success and pass I can pass the message, the string that comes from my back end into the toast. And again, the settings, the toast settings are right here. This is the type of message is a success message, and the position on my screen is the bottom right. So if you drill through the docs, here's the documentation to get you started. You got a playground, and there's all sorts of things, right? There's all sorts of positions, success, dark theme, and click show toast, and you can kind of see what it looks like. So there's your success. Here's your warning. Here's your error. And so all sorts of settings. You can really kind of dive into this, and you could see position top left. As you change this, you're changing the toast container position, right? And the toast emitter, yeah, so if I change this to success, you're also changing it over here. So this is your playground, right? And I can spend a lot of time on this or a little time and just kind of introduce it and then let you go crazy if you want to, right? So that's a 5-second auto close, and we change it to 4-second auto close. 1, 1000, 2, 1000, 3, 1000, 4, 1000. So there's your settings. Let's, in the event of a success, we show success. Again, on the lab, we also had a show error. Maybe I bring that in as well. And I'm going to send this down. Show error. Show error equals show error. And we could receive show error. Maybe use that in the future. If the response status is 200, now keep in mind my backend is sending 200s even if it's a bad username and password. So this might need to be refactored. But let's see what it does. So there we go. We did a build. Let's boot up our backend. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is my password. Why did it do that? Because I forgot my CSS. So let's see if it pops away. Not going to pop away. So I need to bring in a couple more things to get this to work properly, but we're on our way. It does have a CSS file that I want to bring in, and to get that to look how it should. Let's see if I go back, installation, don't forget your CSS, which is all I did. I forgot my CSS. And so if I copy that, import my React Toastify CSS, pretty simple to get a little Toastify message there. And again, I would encourage you to check out the playground and mess around with those. But there's your cores. There's your React Toastify. Now what I want to do is I want to show off a variable that you can use to show if a user is authenticated or not. Because once a user is logged in, we'll save some information about that user in a auth variable. Again, this is something that's on the lab, along with this navigate that I already showed off. And so we'll have a function on login. When we log in the user, we can pass them an object and then tell them to navigate somewhere, and then show a little toast that says logged in. And so step one, let's bring in this state variable called auth. And again, this is just going to be used to kind of track if a user is logged in for our entire application. Realizing right now I've got a lot of this code here that's going to be moved somewhere else. That was a CRUD operations. I had CRUD operations going early on this semester, and I kind of just took those out for now, and we're going to get those working this week. But that's all this commented code out is a lot of CRUD operation stuff that we're going to have to refactor. So here's a use state hook. So basically a variable that we are going to bring in to save some information about the user. So under our app, I'll just go ahead and make a auth use state hook, and then we have a mutator method called setAuth that will modify this auth variable. We initialize it to a null, so auth is equal to null when it's declared and initialized the first time. We're going to have to pass set auth down. Set auth equals set auth. Okay, so this function that is created by this hook is sent down to the login form, which makes sense. We're going to log in at the login form. So we're going to need to modify that variable down there. So let's go back to the login form and let's receive auth. No, it was set auth. Set auth. Which, by the way, I always found this confusing, where it says set auth equals set auth, just having two things named the same. It's like, what's going on? This is the kind of what I view as the exported name of our function on the left. So we're exporting this function or sending it down, and therefore you have to import it the same name right here as what's on the left-hand side of the equal sign. And then the equal sign and then your JSX, your little curlies here say, hey, this is JSX. So we're sending a JavaScript variable called setAuth, which is the name of our function from up top. So they don't have to be the same name, but very conventionally they are. But I just find that a little confusing. But if you do decide to name them differently, just realize this is kind of like your exporting name. And then what's on the right-hand side is what you're actually sending down, the data or the function that you're sending down.
The way I see it, I kind of see it as like HTML attributes.
It is, yeah, it is. It is like you're creating your own attribute.
Yeah, so that's like the set auth attribute that
equals to the variable name. Yeah, yeah, the set auth attribute. That's right. So down here we have set auth, and now it's kind of interesting, right? So my backend is sending 200s, whether it's a good message or a bad message, right? So here's the thing. Okay, I want to go back to why I've structured it this way. Originally, if the user was like, if it was a bad username and password, I sent like a 4.0 client error. Like, hey, you didn't give me a good username and password. 401 or 403, whatever it may be. So I was sending a 401, therefore it was causing the exception to occur, the catch block. Okay, now if you go back to C#, you go back to your C# class, and you're learning exceptions for the first time, the way that exceptions are taught is that they should happen as the exception to the rule. They should not happen frequently. They should happen infrequently. It should be the exception to the rule. That's why they're called exceptions. They shouldn't happen frequently. So when I'm thinking about a user login, username and password, I don't know, half of the time it's going to be a bad password or a bad username. So it's going to happen all the time. So I didn't want my catch block catching exceptions as bad, it's not a true definition of an exception. Okay, I could have structured it that way. I chose not to. But right now, basically, I'm basically looking at strings. And if it says invalid email or password, I could do a little if-else here. And I could say something, if response, data, message, okay, and granted, I could write this more efficiently, right? But I can write an if-else. If it's invalid email or password, else, let's put this up here. Yeah, else it's a good
So a 4.0 message always throws an exception.
Yeah, a 400 from your back end is caught as an exception. And so I refactored my back end. If I kind of highlight that, I'm glad you dug in on that. If I go to my back end routes for my user and I go to my login, notice now I'm sending 200s, invalid email or password, invalid email or password. So if the email doesn't exist, I say invalid. If the password doesn't match, I say invalid. But the status is 200. But when I was sending 400s before, it was being caught. And I could demonstrate that, or you could take my word for it, but that's just what it was doing. Okay, so now I get the message. If I say invalid, I set the message and I show the error. Otherwise, it's good, and I show the success. And so let's just kind of check that out. Because at least my toast will be showing evan@rankin.edu, and if I pass it a bad password, now I get the toast in the error message. And now I get a good message. So, okay, now I'm at least getting two different behaviors based on the message that the back end is sending. And they're both considered good because, well, I mean, that's what I would expect from a database, login. It's either good or bad. Okay, so now there might be some other conditions in here that we come across, like what happens if Joy sends something back. That might be in the catch block. In other words, you kind of bypass my front-end validation on Bootstrap, and Joy sends an error message back. But for right now, this is good. Also notice I am doing a console log of my API. So if I look at my console here, I'm getting this localhost 2024. And this is coming from my Bootstrap validation. I might have to refactor this so that this error message, to talk about these error messages in the console, I don't know if you guys ever look at websites as you just watch the console, but you want to clean these up, but a lot of websites have them. It's kind of like going back to HTML5 validation. You might expect all HTML5 to validate perfectly across the internet, but it turns out most websites don't have perfect HTML5. Most websites don't have, valid CSS, valid HTML5. It's kind of one of those things. This is a cause for this is something to fix. So add it to the list, but it's not like the end of the world is what I would say about it. The main thing is get your application functioning, and then as you're going, clean up your console log errors. And again, what that's actually coming from is right on my login component, I guess. Here's my login component. I've got this use effect that brings in jQuery validation, and you got this class list and all this kind of stuff. I mean, my jQuery validation is working, but it's causing that little console error to show up. So might refactor that to fix that problem. Okay, so now I was left off on this auth, right? So set auth. And if I look at my back end, let me log in with Postman and show you guys the data that the back end is sending, because it should be sending the email and a few other things. So here, if I if I hit this, I've got a message, I've got a role, which the role array, and I'm just going to send the email back as well. So I'm going to go back to my back end because I'm basically going to put that email and the role inside of auth. And I'll tell you what, it's been about an hour, so it's a good time for a break. So I got 9:23. Why don't you guys take 15 minutes and come back at 38. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, we'll go ahead and resume here. I want to point out that on first glance, since we are logging in the login component, which is the login form, you might think, why don't we just declare our state here? And the reason is, if you kind of go down, the login form is a child of route, which is a child of main, which is a sibling of header, which header has a navbar over here. What I want to do is I'm going to take the logged in user and put their email address in the navbar. And so I can't store my state here in this login form because it's not a child of Navbar, but it's some other kind of distant relative here. So you can send data, you can send hooks and data. You could send it down, right? It's really easy to send down, but you can't send it like to siblings. So that's why you can define it here in app, and then you can send it down here, but then you can also, from app, you can also send it down to Navbar, right? Because app is a parent of both Navbar and the login form. Okay, so it just boils down to, you got to kind of define it at the parent level so that you can send it down to the children. And at some point, I'm going to refactor my Navbar so that, like, maybe on the right-hand side, you see the username. Like right now, my Navbar, everything's on the left-hand side, but at some point, I'm going to get it to be on the right-hand side. So, as I kind of showed before, my back end is showing me a couple of things. I'm going to get my email sent from the back end. That's real easy to go to my back end routes. And in the event here, we can also send the email back, which should be the existing user email. So now if I ping that, we get the email sent back, which seems a little redundant because we already have the email stored over here. We actually already have email here, so we could just use the email actually right there. We actually don't need to send that back from our backend. We already have it in a prop right here. But here again, if this right now, this is our working. So we have set auth. So at this point, let's set auth, and we're going to send a. Yeah, let's just send the response data. That's the response data is what we're seeing right here. Message, role, and email. So this auth will be this object, which has a message, a role, and an email. And so our auth field back here will have those three properties. And what I want to do is I'm going to send that down now to my Navbar. So I'm going to say Navbar auth equals auth, which again by default it's null, right? So now I'm going to go to my Navbar JSX. I'm going to receive that prop auth, and I'll do something like auth. Then we'll do a line item that'll say sure, log out. Otherwise, we'll have a line item that says login. Okay, so if auth is truthy, then we get a log out button. Otherwise, we get a login button. And maybe if auth is truthy, maybe we do another li that just says the email address. This might be a little ugly because I'm just welcome auth.email, and this is not happy now because I've got two siblings. I need a parent. I need one parent around both of those. So there's a little React fragment. And this is just a linter saying, hey, but I should, okay, so if auth is truthy, we show that email and a log out button, and we'll fill in these paths later on. So we refresh. Okay, we're not logged in, so we see a login button. And if I successfully log in, we say welcome with the email address and a log out button, which is cool. Now if I delete that cookie, now I've got this, edit this cookie. So if I trash the cookie, you know what, I need to weigh, yeah, okay, that does it. So deleting the cookie does it. Right now I have no cookies here. Evan at rank.edu, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, now I do want to see if I even just refresh it. Notice I lose that state even if I refresh the page, which is a problem, and I intend on showing you the solution to that. But I just want to point out its current functionality. It's working in this sense, but it's not working because it's not persisting auth. If I refresh localhost, I gotta get that auth to persist so that it doesn't disappear. Okay, so that's really what I wanted to cover today. We did implement cores, we did implement React Toastify, we did implement a auth state variable, and we do have the Navbar to show the logged in user, albeit a couple of things that I could do differently to persist that. But that's kind of the demo where I want to stop it today, and I'll show that fix in a future show recording. All right, we'll stop it there.